Sandra Mitchell was grading papers at 1 a.m. when her phone lit up. She almost did not look at it. She had been awake too long, and her eyes were tired, and she had 20 more papers to get through before morning. But she looked. It was a text message from her husband's number, David Mitchell's number, the number she had held in her hand 3 years ago when she called the carrier and canceled the plan 4 days after his funeral, the number that had been disconnected for 3 years. She stared at the screen for a long time. The message was not words. It was a location pin. She pressed on it. The map opened. The pin was dropped on a house in Scottsdale, Arizona. She did not recognize the address. She looked at it for a very long time. Then she looked at the name attached to the pin. It said, David. Sandra Mitchell put her red pen down on the papers she was grading. She picked up her car keys. She did not call anyone. She did not call the police. She booked a 6 a.m. flight to Phoenix on her phone, right there at the kitchen table at 1:08 in the morning. And then she sat very still and thought about the last 3 years of her life. The funeral, the investigation, the $400,000 she had spent 2 years paying back dollar by dollar, while the fraud unit treated her like a criminal. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about one other thing. Renee Carter had been the one who identified the body. Before we go any further, if you are new here, subscribe right now. This channel posts a brand new true story every single day. Real people, real betrayal, real justice. And what Sandra Mitchell is about to find out about the man she buried 3 years ago is one of the most shocking things we have ever covered on this channel. Subscribe, then stay with me, because that location pin is just the beginning.
Sandra and David Mitchell had been married for 9 years when he died. They lived in a 4-bedroom house in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. Good schools, tree-lined streets, neighbors who waved from their driveways on Saturday mornings. The kind of neighborhood that looks like a catalog and feels, if you are lucky, exactly like what it looks like. Sandra was the vice principal of Myers Park High School. She had worked her way up from a 9th-grade English teacher over 12 years, and she was good at her job in the specific way that means students remember you 10 years later and still stop you in grocery stores to say thank you. David was a financial advisor at Piedmont Wealth Management. He managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients, doctors, business owners, old Charlotte money. He was very good at his job, too. The difference was that David's version of very good included moving small amounts of client money into accounts that only he could access. Sandra did not know that. She knew her husband as the man who made coffee before she woke up and left it on the counter with a note most mornings. The man who remembered the names of every student she mentioned more than once. The man who cried at the end of movies he pretended not to care about. She knew him as her husband. She did not know him as a thief, and she did not know him as a man who had been sleeping with her best friend for 2 years. Renee Carter had been Sandra's best friend since their freshman year at Spelman College. They had lived in the same dorm room for 2 years. They had been in each other's weddings. Sandra was Renee's maid of honor when Renee married and divorced a man named Kevin in her late 20s, and Renee stood at the front of the church for Sandra and David. Renee was the kind of friend who showed up. When Sandra's mother had surgery, Renee drove from Atlanta to Charlotte without being asked. When David and Sandra went through a hard stretch in year 4 of their marriage, the kind of hard stretch that most couples go through and most couples survive, it was Renee that Sandra called at midnight. It was also Renee that David called. Sandra did not know that part. She would not know it for 3 more years. What she knew about Renee in the years before David's death was this. Her best friend had moved to Charlotte in 2019, found a job at a marketing firm, and had dinner at their house at least twice a month. She was around all the time. She was family. That is the word Sandra used later when she found out everything. Family. She said she could not decide which betrayal was worse.
Sandra Mitchell died on a Saturday morning in June 2021. He had gone out alone on Lake Norman in a rented boat. He did that sometimes, early morning on the water before the heat came in. He said it helped him think. The boat was found drifting at 11 a.m. by another boater. Engines still running, David's phone and wallet on the seat, his life jacket in the hall, not on him. The water at Lake Norman is deep in places. The currents are unpredictable. The search lasted 4 days. They never found his body. The medical examiner ruled it a probable drowning, accidental death, no foul play suspected. Sandra identified his belongings, his phone, his watch, the blue jacket he wore on the water. Renee Carter came to the lake that day. She was the one who held Sandra when the search coordinator told her they were suspending the dive operations. She was the one who drove Sandra home. She was the one who slept on the couch that night because Sandra could not be alone. Sandra held her hand and cried and said she did not know how she was going to do this without him. Renee told her she would be okay. Renee knew exactly where David was. She had helped him get there. David Mitchell had a $400,000 life insurance policy. Sandra was the sole beneficiary. The insurance company paid out 6 weeks after the death ruling. Sandra had not touched most of it. She paid for the funeral, she paid off the car, she put the rest in a savings account and told herself she would figure out what to do with it when she stopped feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She had spent approximately $60,000 by the time the letter arrived. 4 months later, they wanted it all back. A no-body drowning with a $400,000 policy triggered a standard secondary review. The reviewer noticed 3 things. David had increased the policy limit 14 months before his death. He had taken out a second personal loan against the house 8 months before his death. And in the 18 months before he died, his client accounts at Piedmont Wealth Management had been flagged twice by internal compliance for irregular transfers, both times cleared after David provided explanations. The insurance company referred the case to the Charlotte Fraud Unit. Detective Ray Holt was assigned. He knocked on Sandra's door on a Tuesday morning in October 2021 and introduced himself and asked if he could come in. Sandra let him in. She had nothing to hide. She did not know yet that having nothing to hide is not always enough. The investigation lasted 18 months. Detective Holt pulled Sandra's financial records, her phone records, her emails. He interviewed her colleagues at the school, her neighbors, her family. He interviewed Renee Carter twice. Renee was excellent in both interviews. She cried at the right moments. She said all the right things about Sandra's character. She described in detail the night of the accident, how devastated Sandra had been, how genuine her grief was, how there was absolutely no way Sandra had anything to do with David's death. She was telling the truth about Sandra. She was also making sure no thread led back to herself. The case against Sandra never came together because there was no case against Sandra. She had not known about the insurance policy increase. She had not known about the loan. She had not known about the client account irregularities. She had spent the 4 months after David's death grieving in a house that was slowly revealing itself to be built on a foundation she had not known was rotten. The investigation was officially closed in February 2023 with no charges filed. By then, Sandra had been required to return the full $400,000 insurance payout while the fraud investigation was active. She had already spent $60,000 of it on legitimate expenses. The remaining $340,000 she no longer had. She paid it all back in installments over 22 months. Every dollar she had saved, her retirement account, money her parents gave her. She was paying back money she had already used, plus money she had to find from scratch. She got a letter confirming she was cleared. No apology, just a letter. 6 months after the investigation closed, Renee Carter stopped answering Sandra's calls. At first, Sandra thought nothing of it. Renee went quiet sometimes. She had done it before. gone into herself for a few weeks and then come back, but weeks became months. Sandra drove to Renee's apartment in March 2023 and found it empty. Lease ended, no forwarding address. She called Renee's mother in Atlanta, who said she had not heard from her daughter in 2 months and was worried. Sandra filed a wellness check with Charlotte PD. The officer who responded said the apartment was clean and empty, and there was no sign of anything wrong. Renee had simply left. Sandra thought about it for a while, and then she let it go. She had survived 2 years of being investigated for her husband's fraud. She had rebuilt her finances, kept her job, and started sleeping through the night again. She did not have the energy to chase someone who had chosen to disappear. She did not know yet that Renee had not disappeared. She had gone looking for David.
David Mitchell had started planning his disappearance 14 months before his death. The SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry into Piedmont Wealth Management in April 2020. It was not yet targeting David specifically. It was a broad sweep of the firm after an anonymous tip about irregular client transfers. But David had been careful, and David had been watching, and David knew that careful was not going to be enough forever. He had been moving client money for 3 years, small amounts, dozens of transfers across hundreds of accounts. By the time the SEC inquiry opened, he had accumulated $1.2 million in accounts held under a shell company he had created in Delaware 2 years earlier. He did not panic. He planned. He increased his life insurance policy. He took a loan against the house to create the appearance of financial desperation, something investigators would point to as a motive for fraud, which would conveniently make Sandra look like the person who benefited. He began researching identities. He found a document broker through a contact he had made years earlier. He built a new identity under the name Marcus Reed, born in Atlanta, raised in Phoenix, Social Security number purchased from a man who had died at 19 with no living family. Marcus Reed had a clean credit history built over 14 months. Marcus Reed had an apartment waiting in Scottsdale, Arizona. David Mitchell had thought of everything, except that Renee Carter was not as controllable as he thought she was. David told Renee about the plan 8 months before he disappeared. He did not tell her everything. He told her enough. He told her he was in trouble, that investigators were closing in, that he had to disappear and start over. He told her he loved her. He told her he wanted her to come with him, but that she had to wait. 6 months after the funeral, long enough for the investigation to go quiet. Then she would come to Phoenix, and they would build something new. Renee believed him. She had been in love with David Mitchell for 2 years, and she had been waiting for 2 years to be chosen, and this was him finally choosing her. She helped him stage the boating accident. She rented the boat under a false name 2 weeks before. She drove him to a marina 30 miles from Lake Norman the morning of his death, where a contact picked him up in a car and drove him to a private airstrip. She drove back to Charlotte. She waited for the call that David had not come back from the water. When Sandra called her that Saturday afternoon, crying, Renee answered and said she was on her way. She drove to the lake, and she held Sandra, and she cried. She was very good at performing the grief she did not feel. She had been performing things for 2 years. David Mitchell arrived in Scottsdale on the afternoon of his death. He had $1.2 million in accessible accounts, a clean identity, a furnished apartment, a plan that had worked exactly as designed. What he did not have was any intention of sending for Renee Carter. She had been useful. She had been willing. She had believed what he told her because she wanted to believe it. That was her problem now, not his. David had not been in love with Renee. He had been managing her. She knew too much, and she was volatile, and bringing her to Scottsdale would have been the single biggest risk to his new life, so he did not. He changed his phone number the day after he arrived. He blocked every contact from his old life. He had minor cosmetic work done over the following 3 months, nothing dramatic, just enough to make a casual recognition unlikely. Different glasses, different hair, slightly different nose. He had always been the kind of man who looked good. Marcus Reed looked good too. Within a year, he had a new job in financial consulting, private clients, word of mouth, no firm affiliation. Within 18 months, he had a new woman. Her name was Claire. She was a 34-year-old architect from Phoenix. She thought she was dating a self-made man named Marcus, who had moved from Atlanta for a fresh start. She did not know she was dating a dead man.
Renee Carter had packed a bag. She had done it carefully. Practical things, important documents, some clothes, the jewelry that mattered. She had told her boss she needed a leave of absence for personal reasons. She had not renewed her apartment lease. She was ready. David had told her 6 months. She waited 6 months to the day, and then she waited another week, then another. She tried the number he had given her for emergencies. It rang once and disconnected. She tried it again, disconnected. She tried it from a different phone, the same. She told herself there was an explanation, that something had gone wrong with the timing, that he was being careful, that he would reach out when it was safe. She waited another month. Nothing. By the time a full year had passed since the funeral, Renee Carter had lost her job because her leave of absence had run out and she had not gone back. She had lost her apartment. She was living with a cousin in Atlanta and telling people she was going through a hard time. She was going through a hard time. She had helped a man fake his death and destroy his wife, and he had used her completely and left her with nothing. The hard time was entirely of her own making. She knew that. It did not make the rage any smaller. Renee started with what she knew. David had mentioned Phoenix once, not as the destination, just as a reference point. She had a fragment of the Delaware company name she had seen on a document he left on the table once. She had the name Marcus. She did not have the last name, but she had heard him say it once on a phone call he thought she was not close enough to hear. She was not a private investigator. She was a marketing professional with a laptop and too much time, and a specific fury that turned out to be a very useful research tool. Over 2 years, she burned through her savings. She hired 2 private investigators. The first took her money and gave her nothing. The second was better. She traveled to Phoenix twice. She expanded the search to the whole Phoenix metro area, including Scottsdale and Tempe. She found a Marcus Reed in Scottsdale 18 months in, financial consultant, no social media presence, moved from Atlanta. She flew to Scottsdale. She sat in a rented car across the street from his office building for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he walked out. Different glasses, slightly different nose, same walk, same way of holding his shoulders, same hands. She knew him the second she saw him. She took photographs from the car. Then she drove back to her hotel and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Renee watched David for 4 months. She watched him go to his office. She watched him have dinner with Claire. She watched him at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning buying vegetables like a man with absolutely nothing on his conscience. She thought about confronting him. She thought about calling the police. She thought about what would happen to her if she did either of those things. She had helped him fake his death. She had rented the boat. She had been at that marina. A conversation with the police about David would very quickly become a conversation about Renee Carter. So she sat with it. For 4 months, she sat with it. And then one night, she was going through her phone, and she found Sandra's number still saved under Sandra Girl. She had not deleted it when she disappeared from Charlotte. She had just stopped looking at it. She looked at it now. She thought about Sandra Mitchell going through 18 months of investigation, paying back $400,000 she had not stolen, being treated like a criminal, while Renee sat in interview rooms and lied smoothly, and went home to her apartment and cried, not for Sandra, for herself. She opened the location sharing on David's address. She thought for a long time. Then she opened a new SIM card she had bought at a drugstore.
She typed the address into a location pin. She sent it to Sandra's number from David's old contact name. She wanted David destroyed. Sandra was the only person with enough reason to do it.
Sandra's flight landed in Phoenix at 8:47 a.m. She had not slept on the plane. She had spent the 3-hour flight thinking about everything and nothing at the same time, the way your brain works when it is trying to process something too large to process all at once. She rented a car at the airport without really deciding to. Her hands did the things they needed to do, license, card, keys, while her mind was somewhere else entirely. She typed the Scottsdale address into the navigation. 22 minutes. She drove in the morning Arizona sun through streets that looked nothing like Charlotte, flat and bright and wide open in a way that felt wrong for what she was doing. She did not know what she was going to do when she got there. She had been running on pure adrenaline since 1 a.m., and the adrenaline had not asked her to have a plan yet. She pulled onto the street and slowed down. The house was a single-story adobe in a quiet residential neighborhood. Nice yard. 2 cars in the driveway. One of them was a black BMW. David had always driven a black BMW. She pulled over 2 houses down and turned off the engine, and then her hands started shaking. Sandra sat in that car for 11 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled to a number she had saved 3 years ago and never deleted. Detective Ray Holt answered on the second ring. "Detective Holt," she said, "this is Sandra Mitchell." A pause. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said. His voice was careful. "It's been a while." "I know," she said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it." "Okay," he said. She told him about the location pin. She told him about the flight. She told him she was sitting in a rental car outside a house in Scottsdale, Arizona, where her dead husband's black BMW was parked in the driveway. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Mitchell, do not go to that door." "I know," she said. "I'm going to make some calls right now. I need you to stay in that car, and I need you to stay on the phone with me." "Okay," she said. A pause. "Mrs. Mitchell," Holt said. "Yes?" "I'm sorry," he said, "for the investigation. I was wrong about you." Sandra looked at the house with the black BMW in the driveway. "Find him," she said. It took 4 hours. Holt contacted the FBI Financial Crimes Unit first. Agent Diana Cross had kept her file on David Mitchell's client account theft open and responded within 20 minutes. She contacted the Scottsdale FBI field office. Sandra stayed in the car. At 12:43 p.m., 2 unmarked vehicles pulled onto the street and parked in front of the adobe. 4 agents got out. Sandra watched from 2 houses down. The front door opened before they knocked. A woman stepped out. Claire, Sandra realized, the woman who did not know she was living with a ghost. Then David stepped out behind her. Sandra had not seen him in 3 years. He looked the same, and he did not look the same. Slightly different in the face, different glasses, the same way of holding his shoulders that she had woken up next to for 9 years. She watched them show him the badge. She watched him look down the street toward the line of parked cars. She did not know if he could see her from that distance. She did not move. She watched them put handcuffs on him. She had not cried since she was on the plane. She cried now, not from sadness, from 3 years of carrying something, finally being set down.
The FBI traced the burner phone within 48 hours. It had been purchased at a CVS pharmacy in Scottsdale 4 months earlier. The store camera showed a black woman, late 30s, sunglasses, baseball cap. The phone had been used once to send a location pin to one number and then discarded in a trash can 2 blocks from the store. The number it was sent to was Sandra Mitchell's. The contact name the pin was sent from, David, was a manually typed label, not a saved contact.
Whoever sent it had known that name in Sandra's phone would make her look. Agent Diana Cross ran the CVS camera image through facial recognition. It came back as Renee Carter. Cross had interviewed Renee once during the original investigation. She pulled that file, then she made a call to an Atlanta address. Renee Carter told them everything. She told them about the affair, the plan, the boat rental, the marina, the morning she watched David get into the car that took him to the airstrip. She told them about the 6 months she waited, the 2 years she spent looking for him, finding him in Scottsdale, watching him for 4 months. She told them about the burner phone and the location pin, and why she sent it to Sandra instead of coming forward herself. "I knew what would happen to me if I went to the police," she said. "I needed someone else to go, someone who had a reason to." Agent Cross listened to all of it, and then said, "You understand what you are admitting to?" "Yes," Renee said. "You helped a man fake his own death. You helped him defraud an insurance company. You helped him allow his wife to be investigated and financially destroyed for something she had nothing to do with." "Yes," Renee said again. Her voice was flat. "I did all of that." She took the deal. 3 years probation, community service, full cooperation with the prosecution. She gave them everything they needed to put David Mitchell away for a very long time. Agent Cross told Sandra about Renee 3 days after the arrest. Sandra sat with it for 2 weeks before she called her. Renee answered on the first ring. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Sandra said, "Why did you send it to me?" "Because you were the only person who could finish it," Renee said, "and because you deserved to." "I deserved to know 3 years ago," Sandra said. "I know," Renee said. "I know that." Another silence. "Did you love him?" Sandra asked. Renee was quiet for a moment. "I thought I did," she said. "I think I loved who I thought he was, which turns out to be different from loving someone." Sandra thought about that. "Yeah," she said. "I know what that feels like." That was the only phone call they ever had. Sandra did not forgive Renee Carter. She also did not waste any more of her life on her. She had already wasted 3 years on a man who was not worth it. She was done with debts that were not hers. David Mitchell was charged under both his real name and his assumed identity. The federal charges were extensive: 1 count of insurance fraud, 2 counts of identity fraud, 1 count of faking his own death, which carries its own specific federal statute, and 11 counts of securities fraud and theft for the $1.2 million he had moved from client accounts at Piedmont Wealth Management. The SEC cooperated with the FBI prosecution and provided 3 years of transaction records showing exactly how he had done it: the small transfers, the shell company, the layered accounts. David's attorney argued that the evidence connecting Marcus Reed to David Mitchell was circumstantial, and that facial recognition and one witness's testimony, Renee Carter, a cooperating defendant with her own criminal exposure, was insufficient. Agent Cross had anticipated this argument. She had also pulled David's DNA from a medical record filed under his real name and compared it to a DNA swab taken from Marcus Reed at booking. There was nothing circumstantial about a DNA match. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Sandra attended every day. She sat in the same seat in the gallery, 3rd row, left side, directly in David's eye line if he turned to look. He turned to look twice in the first week and then stopped. She did not look away either time. Renee Carter testified on day 8. She was composed and precise. She described the planning, the marina, the morning of the death. She described the phone call from Sandra that afternoon and what she had said to comfort her. She described the 2 years of looking for David and the 4 months of watching him in Scottsdale. David's attorney cross-examined her for 6 hours over 2 days. She did not break. The financial evidence was overwhelming: 11 years of transaction records, the shell company documents, the wire transfers, the Scottsdale accounts.
money that belonged to David's clients sitting in accounts attached to a man who was legally dead. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts, all 14. David Mitchell was sentenced 6 weeks after the verdict. The judge was a federal judge who had been on the bench for 22 years and had seen a great deal. She did not appear moved by the defense attorney's argument about David's professional achievements and community standing. The standing, she noted, of a man who had not existed for 3 years. She sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison. On the securities fraud counts alone, he would serve a minimum of 15 before any possibility of parole. His assets, the Scottsdale house, the consulting business accounts, everything held under Marcus Reed, were seized. The $1.2 million was returned to his former clients. The $400,000 insurance payout that Sandra had spent 2 years repaying was returned to her in full, with interest, and a formal letter of apology from the insurance company. Sandra stood outside the courthouse after sentencing. Agent Diana Cross came and stood beside her. "How do you feel?" Cross asked. Sandra thought about it, like someone just handed me back 3 years of my life, except they can't actually do that. "No," Cross said, "they can't. But 22 years is a start," Sandra said. The $400,000 was returned to Sandra's account 4 months after sentencing. With interest, it came to $447,000. The letter from the insurance company was 2 paragraphs. It acknowledged the hardship caused by the fraudulent investigation and expressed the company's regret for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. Sandra read the letter twice. Then she filed it in a folder and put the folder in a drawer and made herself a cup of coffee. She rebuilt her retirement account. She paid off the second mortgage David had taken against the house. She donated $20,000 to a fund at her school for students who needed financial support for college applications, the kind of fund that would have helped her when she was 17. She did not throw a party. She did not post anything. She did not make a speech. She just went back to work. She was a vice principal. She had students she needed. She had a school that ran on her showing up every morning. 6 months later, the principal at Myers Park retired. The district offered the position to Sandra. She said yes. Detective Ray Holt retired from Charlotte PD 8 months after the trial. He called Sandra on his last day. She did not expect it. "I wanted to say it again," he said, "properly, not on the phone at 1 in the morning while you were sitting outside a house in Scottsdale." "You already apologized," Sandra said. "I know," he said. "I'm doing it again anyway. I was wrong about you. I spent 18 months treating you like a suspect when the evidence was never there. That was on me, and I'm sorry." Sandra thought about the 2 years of paying back money she had not stolen, the interviews, the looks from people in her neighborhood who had heard things, the way she had walked into her school every morning knowing people were talking. "Thank you," she said, "for picking up when I called from Scottsdale. That was the easiest call I ever took," Holt said. She laughed, a real one. "Take care of yourself, Detective," she said. "You too, Mrs. Mitchell," he said. Then, "Principal Mitchell." She smiled at that. Sandra went to Lake Norman on a Saturday morning in October, 1 year after the location pin. She had not been back since the search, the 4 days she had stood on that shore watching dive boats and telling herself to keep breathing. She drove out alone, early, before the boats were out. She parked and walked down to the water and stood there for a while. The lake was the same lake, still and wide and indifferent in the way that large bodies of water are indifferent. It did not know what had happened here. It did not care. Sandra had thought about this trip for months. She had thought she would feel something specific when she got here, rage or grief or resolution, one of the clean emotions. She did not feel a clean emotion. She felt the lake and the morning air and the sound of water and the specific quiet of being somewhere alone before the rest of the world woke up. She had not let herself have quiet in 3 years. She had been too busy surviving. She stood at the water's edge for a long time. Then she drove home. She had papers to grade. She had a school to run on Monday. She had a life that David Mitchell had tried to take from her and had not managed to. She had all of it, and she was not giving any of it back. David Mitchell spent 3 years living under a dead man's name in Arizona while his wife repaid $400,000 she never stole and went to work every morning and kept going. He had $1.2 million of other people's money and a new woman who did not know his real name and a life that looked good from every angle. He thought he had escaped everything. He had escaped nothing. Because Renee Carter, the woman he used and abandoned, found him first. And Sandra Mitchell, the woman he underestimated completely, finished it. 22 years in federal prison. Every dollar returned. Justice served. If this story hit you, subscribe to Shattered Crown Stories TV, a new story every single day. Justice is always served here. Sometimes it arrives in a location pin at 1 a.m.